What up with it? Another day, another project that's way over my head. This here's a 2008 Yamaha YZ250F, and it appears to have an exploded clutch of some sort. I've never seen this before. We're gonna tear it apart and see what's all damaged on this thing, beyond what I can see. Stay tuned. This is definitely going to need a rear tire. Bolts missing out of the subframe. Nut and washer missing off of the swing arm pivot bolt. Grips are shot. The hot start lever and all that has been removed. Just go ahead and replace this perch. Those wheel bearings are totally done. I don't know what it is with Yamahas, but seems like they always need steering stem bearings. And then this is our concern right here. Obviously the outer clutch case is broken. The guy bought this off of, took all of these parts off and lost them. Doesn't remember what he did with them, but not a big deal. The clutch basket gear that have come apart. So we're gonna get all this torn down and see how deep this damage goes. Or rather than take all this stuff apart in the frame, I'm gonna pull the motor out. I know that the right side crankcase is broken. I can see it from the other side. So we're gonna have to split these cases anyway. This will give me a chance to get a good look at the top end and the valves and make sure all that stuff is in good shape, get everything measured out. Let's get this motor out of the frame. Look at that, a brake banjo bolt holding this in. I want to say that I'm not surprised anymore, but it still surprises me. Some of these people go through a lot of trouble to find a bunch of different bolts to fit in here. 69.1 hours. You don't believe that, do you? As you can see, the right crankcase is cracked. Definitely got some metal shavings. I would say this shift shaft is probably bent pretty good. We pull the oil pump off, take a look at that. All right, let's start tearing this top end down. We've got our engine on top dead center, compression stroke. We can take our tensioner. So far the camshafts look like in really good shape. It's got a little bit of corrosion, but everything looks to be in good shape. It's got some rust in that cylinder. That piston's sticking just a little bit. I'll have to get this cleaned up, see if it's reusable. It's definitely been sitting for a little while, so the rings are stuck in this piston here a little bit. We'll clean all this stuff up, see if any of this stuff is reusable. Normally I'd put a rag over the crankcase to keep these little clips from falling inside, but in this particular case, it doesn't matter. We got to split the cases anyway. Wow, the crankshaft, large end bearing, feels great. Well, that bolt was pretty loose. Pretty much everything on this thing was loose. These gears are going to need to be replaced for sure. All right, let's get these cases split. Double check, we make sure we get all the bolts out. All right, so this is our crankcase separator tool. It bolts to the outside of the case, and when we turn the center screw down, it will actually push on the crankshaft, pulling these cases apart. The crankshaft main bearing into the crankshaft is a little bit of a press fit, and sometimes they can be very difficult to get out. This is the best way to do it, as not to damage the crankshaft. I'm tapping on the output shaft for the transmission lightly, just to pull that through the bearing. Obviously, this pushing on this side is putting some leverage on the case, so we have to just tap this side to make sure it walks off evenly. Once it gets out there, you can kind of put your finger on it and hold it. Couple shards of metal in there, but this side of the crankcase, left side, looks like it's in pretty good shape. Somebody's already put a little bit of JB weld up here. I'm not going to concern myself with that. I'll be getting a whole lower end kit, so it'll come with all new seals. Of course, we'll check all the bearings to make sure that they're in decent shape. So this is what our pickup screen looks like, loaded with metal, as we would have expected. Got a couple little gouges here. It's not going to throw the balance off too bad. If you got some loose teeth, you might lose those, but other than that, your arms will stay on. Well, there we have it. Transmission out, all stripped down. Obviously, case is broken. We saw that. So we're going to have to replace this case. Any bearings that need to be replaced will be done. And a couple of gears on this side that need to be replaced. Let me go order up some parts. And we'll get back with you shortly. And we'll start reassembling this engine. Does anybody else get excited when all the packages and parts start arriving? But you know how it is. There's always that one part that you need to put it together that's still a week out. So you got all this stuff, can't do anything with it. So after what always seems like an eternity, we got a bunch of parts in for the YZ project. I'm pretty excited to get this thing back together. In the meantime, while I was waiting, I went ahead and took the cylinder head apart, cleaned all that up, cleaned up the valves. I got the new used right side crankcase in off the Jungle website. Got the transmission put back in. Our left crankcase is in pretty good shape. A few issues I do have with it is this bearing, transmission support bearing, just does not want to turn. It's frozen up pretty good. So I end up getting a new one of those. Also, I'm going to replace both the bearings for the counterbalancer shaft. This one's a little grindy feeling. There's no point in not replacing it. So got a kit, aftermarket kit that comes with both the bearings. So to get this bearing out, I've already removed the support bracket. You have to use a blind hole puller. And basically what this is, it goes inside the race. And when you tighten this up, it expands it, grabs the inside of the race, and you can slide hammer it out. I'm going to put a little bit of heat on the case itself, help extract this bearing. Not having any luck using the slide hammer to get this out, so I'm going to have to destroy this inner cage, and we'll use a screwdriver to tap it out from the other side. You'll just find a socket that's about the same size as it, drive her home. Put a little bit of blue Loctite. One thing you want to make sure 100% is that you don't get any Loctite on that bearing. This is just using a rubber roller, and this will put a nice even coat. All we need to do is clean off the excess from the spots we don't want it. You just make sure all our mating surfaces are clean, dowel pins are in, any oil passageways and O-rings are in where they need to be. This point here, I'm going to use my crankshaft puller to pull the crankshaft through the bearing. It is a little bit of a tight fit, which is the way it's supposed to be. This tool basically goes on your crankshaft. This little collar will thread onto the end. This piece here has a little bearing down on the end, and this will sit against your case or bearing. In this case, I'm going to have to brace it up because I don't have a flat area to push on. So generally what I'll do is put a socket across from this piece. And as you tighten this, it will pull the crankshaft through the case. Make sure everything in my transmission turns the way it should. Crankshaft works the way it should. Fantastic. I got another shift shaft. I attempted to straighten the other one in the press, but I just cannot get it straight enough to go through the cases properly. When putting these in, don't forget about this little collar. And the collar goes with the big end of the flange facing down or in towards the engine. If you remember the broken crankshaft gears, well, I just happen to have a set hanging around from the 2012 YZ250F project, so that saved me a tick of money. Now this gear only goes on one way. There's a mark on the crankshaft and a mark on the gear. There's actually two marks on the gear, but this is going to be to line up with your counterbalancer. So this inner one will line up with the one on the crankshaft. And the outer gear doesn't matter. Don't forget your oil feed tube. Now obviously the whole reason for this build is due to the some failed gear in here, which caused a failure of this, or this caused a failure of that, who knows. So ended up picking up a whole new clutch assembly for $100. Sweet. While we got this opened up, let me give you a real brief explanation on how the clutch works on this. So obviously this is your crankshaft here. The crankshaft gear actually will drive the clutch basket. The clutch basket will drive the oil pump and a couple other things, but this center hub is attached to the input of the transmission. So basically when this thing's in neutral or you have the clutch pulled in, what you'll have is the engine spinning, clutch basket running, center hub is staying still. Now the clutch basket is splined into your friction plates. So basically as this engine is running, all your friction plates are spinning with the clutch basket. Secondly, you have a set of steel plates. Now these steel plates, as you notice, are splined into the center hub. Now, when the engine's spinning, your frictions are spinning, your steel plates are staying still. Now the whole clutch assembly is all squeezed together into this pack by these springs. When the clutch is released, all of this assembly will turn together as one, driving your transmission. Now when you pull on your clutch cable, this little center button here will actually raise as you pull it. And what that's doing is it's pushing this outer clutch hub away from this inner clutch hub, essentially spreading all the packs out so that they can slip in between each other like they are now. I'm going to put this together temporarily. If the clutch is shot on this, which it does look like it has a little bit of time in on it, I'll go ahead and replace it in the future. If you ever got a bike where you got the clutch pulled in all the way and the thing still feels like it's dragging or wants to pull, either you're out of adjustment, or a lot of times what happens is when these plates, these metal plates, get overheated, they'll actually warp. They'll twist a little bit. And when they twist, because there's such little gap between all of this stuff when the clutch is pressed, it will cause the clutch to drag. So usually replacing the entire clutch, meaning frictions, steels, new springs, will take care of that problem. Now, as these clutch plates go in, it's going to get more and more difficult to turn this thing. So let me see if I can still continue to turn this, even without the spring pressure on it. Now, the engine itself, because it's a lot of horsepower, is not going to have a problem spinning this at all. But once we get a little bit of oil in here, it won't drag quite as bad. And once you clamp this down, it's going to be locked together. Always want to tighten your clutch nuts slowly, incrementally, and a cross pattern to eliminate or potentially eliminate any kind of warping. Now this is all together. You can see everything turns as one. Now when you pull your clutch cable, you notice your outer plate is actually lifting up, and it's causing looseness in the plates so that they can slip. So as you let your clutch out slowly and this squeezes back down, it's going to crush all these plates back together and lock it all up. And you know what that means. Brap out this end. As you can see right now, we're in neutral. I can hold the output shaft. It's not going anywhere. Clutch basket is all spinning as one. Transmission is all turning. But because it's in neutral, we have no output right now. Next thing we're going to do is install our counterbalance shaft. One thing we need to pay attention to is this notch. This will not clear the crankshaft web. Only way to clear it is to put that notch. Now for the counterbalancer shaft gear, there's 2 marks on this one as well, just like the crankshaft gear, and they have to mesh. Now this will only go one way on here, and there's actually one lower spline which will line up with this inner dot. If you can't see it, don't worry about it because it only goes on one way. However, there's an outside dot that has to line up with the outside dot evenly on the crankshaft sprocket. So if we drop that on and mesh it in, you can see it fits perfectly. However, our dots are not lined up. This thing's going to vibrate like crazy. So all we need to do is just rotate this over until those dots line right up, as you can see right here. Before putting our clutch side case back on, there's another dowel with an O-ring. Must go there. There's also one more dowel up here with an O-ring for your cooling system. That must go. Make sure your alignment dowels are in. And also there's an O-ring right here that needs to be there. Now we go to put this on, this might be a little difficult to mesh up. Sometimes you take the water pump cover off and wiggle it, but let's see what we can do. There we go. Now we're just going to go ahead and reuse the old oil filter because it looks like it's in pretty good shape. Now that we got our bottom end together, it's time for the fun stuff. Let's get our top end together. Went ahead and cleaned up the piston. Had to pry the rings out of it. They got stuck in there pretty good. So we got a new set of piston rings, standard size for the YZ250 piston. And while I was at it, I went ahead and did a light hone on the cylinder just so the rings have something to seat on. And this is always kind of a good idea to do this because the cylinder is actually, you know, in decent shape from what it looked like. And originally, when I did the hone, I was like, wow, it's in great shape. Had some oil on it, and I let it sit. And then when I wiped the oil out to inspect it, very light marks in the Nickel seal coating. And I can just barely feel it with my finger. So there's absolutely no way I'm going to go ahead and put this top end together with this cylinder. We're going to need to get a new one here right away. Let's do the old trick. Go ahead and put a brand new cylinder on this bad boy. First order of business, we're going to take our new piston rings and we're going to check our end gaps. Use your piston to square them up in the cylinder. Always want to follow our manufacturer's recommendations for ring gap clearances. And this one here is basically telling you that they want you to multiply your bore size in inches times a specific number. So we're just going to go with dirt, ATV, snow, PWC. And it's basically for the top ring is going to be bore times 0.0040 is going to be your gap. And for the second ring, bore times 0.0050. So we have exactly 77 millimeters, 3.03 inches. And if I do this math real quick in my head, 3.03 times 0.0040, 0.012. So according to these calculations, 0.012 for our top ring, 0.015 for our second ring. And these are going to equate to 0.30 millimeter for the top ring, 0.38 millimeter for the bottom ring. Since we have the bottom ring in right now, let's go ahead and measure it. It looks like it's going to be too tight, so I'll have to file the ring end gaps. Yep, both ring gaps are going to need to be filed. Now to modify these ring gaps, I'm going to put them very lightly in your vise. This vise has flat jaws. It does not have rippled jaws. And we're just going to very lightly with a flat square file take a little bit off each end. We certainly don't want to go too far. Always check with your manufacturer. The rings normally have a mark on it which way goes up. Well, this will definitely be little by little. Don't want to take off too much. As you can see, our feeler gauge just barely snugs through. That's perfect. YZ250 says with the oil rails that they don't really need to be gapped as long as they've got 0.010 of an inch of minimum clearance. You're in the clear, and we're looking good. Also critical is going to be your end gap placements, and again, whether you're using OEM or an aftermarket piston and ring set, you want to put the piston rings where they belong. Always cover your crankcase with a rag before you put this clip in, so you don't drop it down inside. These can kind of be a pain, but you just don't want to put too much pressure on them and deform them so that they'll fall out. There's a groove inside the piston. Make sure that that is in that groove. Double check your ring gap positions. Put a light coating of oil. Now you just got to really take your time and get this into the bevel. Before you push it down too far, make sure that your oil control rings, top and bottom, haven't folded over or pulled out of their gap. They're very thin, and it definitely can happen. Go ahead and throw a zip tie on your timing chain so you can drop it down in there without fear of it falling through. Not that it would matter right now, but help you keep a little control of it. A little bit of oil on your threads and on the washers. Torque the large head bolts to 27 foot-pounds. We're going to do that in 2 stages. I'm going to do 13, then 27. Pattern will be back by the intake, number 1, 2, 3, 4. Next thing we're going to do is get our cam timing set back up. First thing we need to do is get the engine up on top dead center. I'm going to put the flywheel on lightly just so I can turn it. What I'll use is a long screwdriver or a straw you can stick down inside. And we want to bring that piston up to its top dead center. Obviously we need to hold our chain so it doesn't bind. So we're going to bring it and just rock it back and forth until it's not going down or not going up. And you should feel it's like a little bit of a light spot. There's no drag. So right there is going to be our top dead center. First thing, we'll put our exhaust camshaft in. There's 2 notches, and that's going to line up with the left side of the cylinder head. This notch, you'll never get it to line up because it'll be trying to depress the valve. So you're looking at the counterclockwise most notch. Keeping tension on the front of the timing chain and making sure that we haven't moved off top dead center. You can see that our mark is lined up with our cylinder head. The other camshaft is going to be similar. On Yamaha, it has an E and an I for intake and exhaust. Obviously those are going to have to be right up. And this might take a little bit of trial and error to get it just right. But it looks like I got it on the first shot. Again, keeping tension on the front, making sure that we haven't moved off our top dead center. Our punch mark is still lined up with our cylinder head here, and both of the punch marks on the intake camshaft are lined up. When they're lined up properly, you'll see that the cam lobes are going to kind of point up and away equally on both of them. Re-verify top dead center. Re-verify our marks. We'll get our cam caps on and torque down. Do a couple of full revolutions of the engine and then recheck everything. Once you get your cam caps tightened down, obviously make sure that your cams rotate freely. They're not binding. If they do, there's an issue. Now when I built this head, I went ahead and shimmed all the valves properly. And now that it's torqued down, I'm just going to double check that real quick before we move on. Now that we've checked everything shimmed out properly, we'll go ahead and put our tensioner back in. I usually like to save these little T's when I replace the tensioner so I can lock it back in. Some of the tensioners will stay in on their own if you turn them in with the screwdriver tight enough, but sometimes they don't. We'll do the same thing, get this back over on top dead center. At this point now, we only want to be turning this thing counterclockwise. Do not turn the crankshaft backwards. An indicator that you're on top dead center is also, usually on these, the Woodruff key on the crankshaft will point directly up the engine. Now, there's one thing you want to look at right here. This being a 4-stroke engine, there's actually 2 top dead centers. One on the intake exhaust stroke, one on the compression ignition stroke. So right now we're 180 degrees out. If you look, we're on top dead center and none of our marks line up. If you look at our intake camshaft, the E and the I are upside down. So we're 180 degrees out on this. All we need to do is rotate it one more full revolution. And there we are. Top dead center on the crankshaft. Timing mark on the exhaust cam lines up. Timing mark on the intake cam lines up. Well, so there you have it. We have ourselves a refreshed YZ250F engine. Time to get her back in the frame. I kicked the bike a few times before I put fuel in it, just to see if I can circulate some of this oil before we dry start it. We're just going to start it, shut it down pretty quick, and recheck our fluids. I think this thing has a potential coolant leak, so we'll have to look into that. Here we go again. Maybe too much now. Sounds like I got an exhaust leak too. And an oil leak. Well, the good news is that it runs. Now I just have to button up all these small issues. We'll get it cleaned up and we'll go out for a test ride. Well, it looks like our oil tank has a little crack in it. And that's where our oil leak's coming from. So we'll have to get one of these ordered.